So we're getting a little bit behind in Dickens, so I thought I would go ahead and just catch us up a little bit. Um, Let me add a little bit about Dickens himself. This is from something I copied. He was regarded as a literary colossus of his age. Everybody's pretty familiar with maybe A Christmas Carol, Oliver Twist, Great Expectations. Um, this book we're doing, 1859, A Tale of Two Cities, was his best effort at sort of a historical fiction. Um, a lot of times you can tell a lot about one of these guys by seeing what other literary figures of his day thought. Leo Tolstoy, George Orwell, and G.K. Chesterton. All three of those commended him, and they especially appreciated his realism, comedy, prose style, the way he wrote, unique characterizations, we'll talk about that, and social criticism. Remember, when he was young in the Industrial Revolution, his father had gone broke, had been put in a pauper's prison, and Dickens himself had to work in the ink factory, and so a lot of his stories are about the oppression of the poor as a result of industrialization. But these writers appreciated that in him. On the other hand, Oscar Wilde, Henry James, and Virginia Woolf, they all complained of a lack of psychological depth, loose writing, and a vein of saccharine sentimentalism. Um, it's said that people either love Dickens or hate Dickens. And as you can see from the descriptions by both of these, some people really like his characterizations. You can't forget his characters. We'll talk about a couple of them in a second. But at the same time, they're sort of they're not psychologically complicated like more modern literature. Well, for instance, like Dostoevsky. He's not modern, but Dostoevsky was a little more complicated. But people either love his characters or they think they're way too simple and sentimental. I personally love Dickens. To me, there's nothing any more fun than to listen to a good reader read Dickens on one of my Audible books, or to sit down and curl up by the fire as well. So that's sort of his reputation among his peers. Um, he he talked a lot about poor social conditions, uh, sort of repulsive characters. Um, in a paper written by Dr. and I'm reading this, Hassan Shakir, he's a guy from over in the Middle East. He says one of the achievements that Dickens possesses in connection with the art of his novels is his obvious success in creating memorable characters in his substantial novels. The power that lies under his striking success is that he uses so many interesting techniques to describe characters in detail. I'm hoping that you're picking that up. He uses many fixed phrases, styles of clothing, parts of jewelry, typical pets, chronic diseases, handy tools, elements of decorations, positions of the body, and mannerisms, and using some external organs and the manners associated in daily life. Characters are marked with such techniques, and these become indispensable parts of their characterization. Based on the actions and the manners, characters seen with these objects are easily recognized and remembered by the reader to the end of a particular novel. The vivid, colorful, credible, some people wouldn't say credible, and lifelike characters and the techniques used for the creation prove the matchless mastery of the writer. If you don't agree with his value of the particular characteristics he points out, at least it's obvious to everyone that those are the characteristics of the different people who play in Dickens' novels. So let me say, let me go to, let me say a little more about characters, because I think even though in A Tale of Two Cities, the characters aren't as memorable, as I understand it, Dickens was not interested in A Tale of Two Cities in continuing his more detailed development of his characters, but he was more interested, since it was a historical fiction, he was more interested in creating broad strokes of context. When the description of the mob that you're going to see throughout the book, the description of the wealth that will become part of the struggle in the book, rather than characters. But nonetheless, when Dickens paints in your mind's eye a character, drawing from this palette of characterization, you can't forget those people. Let me give you an example of something you've already read. It's on page 35 in your book. Madame Defarge, his wife, sat in the shop behind the counter as he came in. Madame Defarge was a stout woman of about his own age, with a watchful eye that seldom seemed to look at anything. A large and heavily ringed, steady face, strong features, and great composure of manner. There was a character about Madame Defarge from which one might have predicted that she did not often make mistakes against herself in any of the reckonings over which she presided. Madame Defarge, being sensitive to cold, was wrapped in fur and had a quantity of bright shawl twined about her head, though not to the concealment of her large earrings. Her knitting was before her, but she had laid it down to pick her teeth with a toothpick. Thus engaged, with her right elbow supported by her left hand, Madame Defarge said nothing when her lord came in. You won't forget this lady by the time Dickens gets finished with the story. And so, again, if you read one of the other stories, everybody remembers Oliver Twist, and everybody remembers Scrooge from The Christmas Carol. He's just great with these different tools that he uses. And characterization, to me, is probably one of his strongest suits. Okay, so that's part of his style. Let's go ahead and talk about our theme for the year. Remember, our topic for the year is love, and we've seen a couple of governing ideas from Adler, truth and justice. And in the end, we're going to see how love fulfills those two ideas. However, for now, we have narrowed our theme to an understanding of active love's transforming power. That word active love comes from our reading in Dostoevsky. Remember that the kiss of Christ was the answer to the inquisitor's accusation, and Dostoevsky's Alyosha had much service that he had to perform in the world before he could come back. Ivan Ilyich found freedom in dying for his family rather than in resentment. And Solzhenitsyn's Baptist Alyosha demonstrated a love that begins to change Chekhov at the end of the novel. The same is going to happen in this book. Watch for it. You are going to see the same theme of active love transforming a character. There's two other themes that I want you to look for, and you need to start marking these. One is recalled to life, the resurrection, and sacrifice. One of the famous quotes in this book, "It is a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done before." And this comes in the context of sacrifice. So already, as Mr. Lowry was moving toward France, the secret code message was recalled to life. And over, you're going to see resurrections of people who you thought were done in as you go through the book. So pay attention to resurrection. Pay attention to the sacrifice that's necessary for that resurrection. The other theme that's pointed out in Sparks, and I'll just mention it, is the tendency toward violence and oppression by revolutionaries. Remember the Ministry of Love in 1984. So there's another theme that you want to keep in the back of your mind as you're reading through the book. How oppressive governments, whether it's revolutionary or tyrannical, always move toward violence and oppression. Motifs, we've already talked about the doubles as a motif. There's another one, though, that I'm sure you've picked up already. On page, I believe it's page 16. It begins a chapter 3. I'm going to read this to you. A wonderful fact to reflect upon, that every human creature is constituted to be that profound secret and mystery to every other. A solemn consideration, when I enter a great city by night, that every one of those darkly clustered houses encloses its own secret, that every room and every one of them encloses its own secret, and every beating heart in the hundreds of thousands of breasts there is, in some of its imaginings, a secret to the heart nearest it. Reread that page if you will. I need to hurry so I can get this posted. Well, so this whole idea of every person has their secret, and that it may or it may not be revealed. But at the end of that portion, it says that you will never know the depth of every secret, no matter how dear or how near the person is. And so look for hints that there's a secret. And look how it's revealed later on. And look how Dickens will build the hints that something's there, but never hints of what it is until after he reveals it clearly later on in the novel. You're going to love it. So let me give you just one example on page 17. Jerry Cruncher, who is the doorman at or the go-man at the bank, he's kind of mumbling to himself after he's delivered a message, and he's heard this secret code. He doesn't know what it means, recalled to life. But he mumbles to himself, and he'll do this. You kind of start getting hints that it's moving towards something. No, Jerry, no, said the messenger, harping on one theme as he rode. It wouldn't do for you, Jerry. Jerry, you honest tradesman. It wouldn't suit your line of business. Recalled? Bust me if I don't think he'd been a-drinking. And so there's something about that theme that just doesn't sit well with Jerry. What could it be? You're going to find out in book 2. So as you read through, remember these themes, look for these motifs, watch and enjoy how Dickens weaves it all together. And then when we come to class, I would like for everyone to be able to share a bit about what you think about Dickens' style. Comment on how one of the themes are developing. And unfortunately, we can't get into it too much because it will give away the whole best part. And like every other novel we've done, we will read the last chapter in class. So don't read that last chapter, no matter how far you get, because it's much more fun to read it together. All right, God bless you. I will see you in class.